I'd like to take a minute so that we can discuss the civilization of the ancient Indus River Valley. This is territory that comprises what's now northwestern India and eastern Pakistan. And both societies can kind of claim this civilization as their origin point. This civilization was based on rice agriculture, and there were very large, very complex, very well centrally planned cities. And this is an important aspect of this civilization because this civilization was unique in how well the cities were planned. They were centrally planned almost from the beginning. And they had very, very, very advanced sanitation systems and systems to move water around. And this is a critical part of what archaeologists believe to be the ancient Indus River Valley religion, which was based around ritual bathing. This civilization was warlike. There's archaeological remains that show as high as 15% of the male population died violently at some point when looking at skeletons from various burials from different city-states that emerged as part of this civilization. On top of that, this civilization had a very stratified hierarchy, and this will be important for Indian civilization later on, in that this is the very foundation of the caste system that we talked about that would develop with Hinduism. Hinduism comes from a combination of the religions of the peoples of the Indus River Valley with people who conquered them later, called the Aryans, and we'll talk about in a moment. The social system was highly stratified, meaning that there was a large distinction between the nobility and ordinary people. There seemed to have been a four-tiered system with kings and priests on top, followed by nobles, followed by commoners, followed by pariahs, people who were allowed to live either outside the walls only or at the very bottom level of the city. These cities were constructed kind of in terraced form, going from the bottom to the top, with the royalty living at the very top, and usually having a very large ritual bath located next to their palace. One area where ritual bathing, where stratification was clearly evident was in ritual bathing. This was critical to the ancient Indus River Valley's religion. We know this from the sheer number of baths with different religious carvings and inscriptions in them. And not everyone could use the same baths. The baths were segregated by what would later evolve into the caste system. And this city was, the expertise in moving water wouldn't be reached until much later on in history by other civilizations. You had a very complex drainage system in which sewage was moved out of the city, but only certain people of certain classes could use certain ritual baths. And this emphasis on ritual bathing continues in Hinduism today with the bathing in the Ganges River that's thought to be rejuvenating, that the water has particular sacred healing qualities. The Ganges River is the most sacred river in India, which is a land in which rivers are considered sacred, period. But that water is seen as special, that it has certain healing properties, and it's one reason that so many ashes from cremated corpses are put into the water. And there's one of the supplemental videos, the first one from this week, is on the, it's a brief video about the burial of corpses, ashes in the Ganges River. Now I'd like to take a precise look at the city of Harappa. Harappa was the first of the Indus River Valley cities that was uncovered. And it's a very interesting site because of how advanced the technology was there. This was the site where dentistry was invented. It's the site where buttons were invented. This huge system, drainage system that removed sewage from all parts of the city, with each family having their own well, which was part of a huge network of wells. So this city was the peak administrative center of a civilization that contained about 10% of the world's people at the time. It was once believed that this was a unique city in that, as a major city-state, it wasn't violent. There wasn't warfare. We now know that it was the administrative center of a very, very large warlike civilization. And we know that the reason that the city did not have a wall was because it was surrounded by subject cities, and so there wasn't a need in maintaining a very large wall. Not because the Indus River Valley civilization was not warlike. The civilization was larger than that of ancient Egypt, and you don't get that large unless you're militarily successful. The second largest city in the Indus River Valley civilization was that of Mohenjo-Daro, which was centered around a gigantic bath. And this was a ritual bath used by the nobility in their religious ceremonies. You have many baths throughout the city, and these baths were relegated to different social classes. The city was abandoned around 1900 BC, along with the rest of the cities of the Indus River Valley civilization. And the reason for this, archaeologists think, is because the climate became progressively cooler. And as the climate became cooler, the agricultural situation became less and less tenable, and people began to move to the east, to what's the Ganges River, in an attempt to find a better climate. After the collapse of the Indus River Valley civilization and its population becoming depleted, a new group of invaders arrived from what's now Afghanistan. And we call these people the Aryans, the Aryan tribes. And that's a term that has been misused, misinterpreted, and very inaccurately thrown around since the 19th century. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. But our use of the term has little to nothing to do with with how that term has been used. So the Aryans called themselves Aryans, which meant that they were the noble people. And this was a cattle herding group of tribes that invaded the Indus River Valley from what's now Afghanistan. These Aryans, or nobles, originated in the Ponic Steppe, which is a territory directly north of the Caucasus Mountains, with the western border in what's now the Ukraine, the center in southern Russia, and the east in western Kazakhstan. These people were very, very warlike. They mastered the art of the chariot very early on, and if you know anything about chariot warfare, you know that it involves horses pulling a cart with usually a driver and an archer, sometimes even a lancer who has a spear. And this was very, 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 very devastating when used against foot soldiers in the Bronze Age. As these peoples moved south, they eventually began to establish kingdoms. And the different tribes would sometimes war with one another, but they also would wage war against the indigenous people who were the remnants of the Indus River Valley civilization. As they established cities and kingdoms, we begin to enter what's called the Vedic Age, or the age of the Vedas, which were the original Hindu holy texts that were created by the Aryan invaders, with some influence of the religion of the pre-Indus River Valley civilization. pre-invasion Indus River Valley civilization. Now let's return for a minute to this word, Aryan, so we can better explain what we mean. We're not talking about anyone Germanic, having anything to do with any origin in Northern Europe. What the term Aryan means in this context is Indo-European or Indo-Aryan. And that's a language family. And that includes most European languages, the Iranian languages, Persian, and also Hindi, the language of northern India, and other Indo-Aryan languages of northern India. So we're looking at a very, very broad group of people speaking languages that the languages have a common ancestor, right? Just as English and German are part of the Germanic subfamily of Indo-European or Indo-Aryan languages, English and Germanic have a common ancestor. If you listen to Old English, it'll sound like German, right? And English it breaks off from the Germanic languages with the introduction of French and Latin, etc. But there are different language families throughout the world where all the languages share a known common ancestor. So you have Sino-Tibetan for Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese, the other Sinic languages, and you have the Tibetan. Thai is also a Sino-Tibetan language. You also have the Afroasiatic languages, which used to be called the Semitic languages: Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, the Ethiopian languages, Amharic, Ge'ez, etc. So what this means is that all the Indo-European languages have a common ancestor, Proto-Indo-European. Now, that doesn't mean that genetically the people have the same ancestors, though in most instances that's probably the case, due to the fact that sometimes people can adopt other languages and not have and not necessarily be ethnically tied to the original speakers of those languages. However, in most instances, there's at least some ancestry there. And usually speakers of these languages trace their ancestry back to a common ancestor, such as, for example, Arabs, Ethiopians, Amharic Ethiopians, and Jews trace their ancestry back to Abraham, right? They're all speakers of Afroasiatic language, which in the traditional interpretation goes back to Abraham, the common ancestor believed to be of all three groups traditionally. The reason that we know that these languages are related is because they have similarities in word and in syntax, right? For example, you have the term Aryan, the pure or the nobility, the noble ones, and then you have the word Iran, right? The land of the nobles, and then you have the word Ireland or Ire in ancient Irish, right? Which is again the land of the noble ones. So these three words are related: Aryan, Iran, Ireland. Right? These are related words because they come from the same original ancestral language, Proto-Indo-European or Indo-Aryan. Now that we've taken a look at the map of language families, we can get an understanding of how and why this term Aryan was so radically misused. Well, Indo-European speakers spread throughout the ancient world. They spread to India, they spread to Iran, they spread to what is now Turkey, they spread throughout the European continent into North Africa, and all the way to Western China with the people called the Tocharians. In the 19th century, it was assumed that there was a kind of Germanic seed people to all of the Indo-European migrations, that the original Proto-European Indo-Europeans were Germans. They were speaking, they looked like Germans. They had a kind of superior Germanic culture, and this carried over into the 20th century. And the use of the term Aryan began to mean an ancestral Northern European, which was actually not the case for the actual Aryans. When we look at skeletons taken from sites from the Yamnaya culture, which is a term we use to describe the kind of Proto-Indo-European or Aryan population, we see that physically the people are Eurasian. They have a combination of Caucasian and East Asian features. The Germanic phenotype was something that had developed in the original European population that was later conquered by the Indo-Europeans, the ancient Aryans, the same way that they conquered India. So what we actually see when we look at the remains of the ancient Indo-Europeans, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, is people who resemble more or less some of the groups in modern-day Afghanistan. So the term has been vastly misused. We need to make sure that we understand the term in its right context when we're looking at Indian history.